For decades, Gayle King has been the unshakable anchor of morning television, radiating joy, resilience, and an unwavering smile that woke up America. We thought we knew the woman behind the iconic glasses, the intensely loyal best friend to a billionaire, the tireless broadcast journalist, the seemingly invincible force of nature. But at 71 years old, the vibrant facade is cracking, revealing a deeply emotional reality that no one was prepared for. Behind the designer dresses and perfectly poised celebrity interviews lies a heartbreaking battle with aging, legacy, and a deeply personal struggle she has desperately tried to keep hidden from the cameras. When you discover what Gayle has truly been facing in silence, you'll never look at her morning broadcasts the same way again. Imagine, for a moment, living your entire adult life with your name permanently attached to a hyphen. For decades, before she was a legendary morning anchor, before she was a household name in her own right, she was known simply to the masses as Oprah's best friend, Gayle. It sounds like the ultimate golden ticket, doesn't it? Private jets, exclusive celebrity galas, rubbing elbows with the most powerful and influential people on the planet. But in the notoriously vicious, ego-driven, and hyper-competitive world of broadcast journalism, that title wasn't a crown. It was a suffocating, heavy chain. While the public saw two wealthy women conquering the globe, snapping photos on superyachts, and laughing on daytime television, the reality behind the scenes was an entirely different, heavily guarded story. Gayle was quietly fighting an exhausting, agonizingly steep uphill battle to prove she was more than just a famous billionaire's sidekick. Think about how crushing it must be to pour your blood, sweat, and tears into a demanding profession, only for everyone around you to assume you were simply handed the keys to the kingdom because of who you knew. Gayle didn't just stumble into a plush television studio. She spent years grinding it out in the gritty trenches of local news. She worked as a lowly production assistant. She pounded the pavement as a reporter for WDAF-TV in Kansas City. And she anchored the news in Hartford, Connecticut, for 18 grueling years. She put in the unglamorous hours, the sleepless nights, and the relentless hustle that the industry demands. Yet, no matter how many hard-hitting local stories she broke, no matter how many Emmy Awards she won on her own merit, the coastal industry elites would look at her and see only one thing: Oprah's shadow. Network executives would take her calls, sure, but how many of those expensive suits were secretly just hoping she would pass along a message to the queen of daytime? How many times did she walk into a boardroom, armed with brilliant pitches and undeniable journalistic instincts, only to see the condescending smirks of producers who thought she was just a wealthy socialite playing dress-up as a reporter? The psychological toll of that kind of relentless dismissal, day after day, year after year, is enough to break anyone's spirit. It is an agonizing paradox. The very friendship that gave her unparalleled access to the world was simultaneously the biggest, most impenetrable barrier to her own professional legitimacy. She loved Oprah fiercely, but she desperately needed the world to know that Gayle King was a force of nature all on her own. For years, she smiled through the subtle insults. She played her part perfectly. She helped launch the Oprah magazine, and hosted syndicated radio shows, always hovering safely and profitably within her best friend's massive orbit. But deep down, a fierce, undeniable hunger was gnawing at her. She wanted the big leagues. She wanted the network desk. She wanted to prove every single whispering critic dead wrong. And eventually, her sheer, undeniable talent became too massive for even the most skeptical, gatekeeping executives to ignore. When CBS finally came knocking, it felt like the ultimate vindication. This was it. The morning show wars. The holy grail of broadcast news. The exact moment Gayle King finally stepped completely out of the shadow of a giant and into her own blinding, national spotlight. She was ready to show America, and the world, exactly who she was. She was finally sitting at the big desk, holding her own alongside veteran journalists, commanding millions of viewers every single morning. The sidekick era was dead. The era of Gayle King, the formidable broadcast journalist, had officially begun. But in the ruthless world of network television, victories are often short-lived, and the higher you climb, the harder the industry tries to push you off the ledge. Just as Gayle was finally settling into the hard-won crown she had spent 40 years fighting for, an unprecedented storm was brewing right beside her. She had fought tooth and nail to secure her place at that iconic glass desk, completely unaware that the man sitting right next to her was about to drag the entire network into one of the darkest, most scandalous chapters in television history. And suddenly, Gayle's long-awaited dream was about to transform into a waking, broadcast nightmare. When Gayle King officially took her seat at the CBS This Morning desk, it was supposed to be the undisputed pinnacle of her career. The morning show arena isn't just television. It is an absolute blood sport. Millions of dollars in advertising, massive corporate egos, and brutal ratings wars define every single minute of the broadcast. But Gayle? She was thriving. For the first time, she wasn't the plus one to a media empire. She was helping build one from the ground up. Viewers were rapidly falling in love with her infectious energy, her razor-sharp wit, and that uncanny ability to make even the most heavily guarded celebrities completely drop their defenses. Everything was finally falling into place. The glass ceiling was officially shattered. But in November 2017, the glass didn't just shatter. It completely caved in, bringing the entire network down with it. Imagine waking up in the pitch-black hours of the morning, preparing to deliver the news to millions of Americans, only to discover that the biggest, most horrific headline of the day is sitting right next to you. The explosive sexual harassment allegations against her legendary co-anchor, Charlie Rose, sent an absolute shockwave through the media landscape. In an instant, the pristine, carefully curated world of CBS This Morning was transformed into ground zero of the #MeToo movement. The network was in total freefall. Panic echoed through the control rooms. Millions of dollars were suddenly on the line, and the corporate executives were utterly paralyzed. Somebody had to face the cameras. Somebody had to look America in the eye and explain the inexplicable. That impossible burden fell squarely onto the shoulders of Gayle King. When the red light on the camera flashed on that fateful morning, viewers didn't get a sanitized, PR-approved corporate statement. They got a masterclass in raw, agonizing vulnerability. Gayle sat at that desk, her voice shaking but her resolve absolute, and uttered 4 words that would permanently cement her legacy. I am not okay. She didn't hide her heartbreak. She didn't excuse the abhorrent behavior. And she absolutely didn't flinch. In a moment of unprecedented chaos, Gayle King essentially became the moral compass for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The press lauded her. The executives breathed a massive sigh of relief. The public praised her immense stoicism and steady leadership. But what the cameras didn't capture was the devastating, suffocating toll this was secretly taking on her behind the scenes. Gayle was suddenly forced to hold an entire, crumbling franchise together with her bare hands. She became the de facto leader, therapist, and protector for a terrified, deeply traumatized staff. Every single day, she had to march into a building clouded by scandal, project absolute invincibility, and carry the colossal weight of a network fighting for its survival. But when you are busy holding everyone else's world together, who is holding yours? The grueling, unrelenting hours, the constant paranoia of who might be implicated next, and the terrifying pressure to maintain her own flawless reputation were quietly pushing her to the absolute brink. Behind closed doors, the vibrant, ever-smiling anchor was completely exhausted. The stress was silently ravaging her nervous system. She was suffering from the intense, hidden trauma of a workplace betrayal that no one was allowed to talk about. Yet, she refused to let the executives see her sweat. She weaponized that pain, channeling her exhaustion into an intense, hyper-focused drive to prove that she, and CBS, would not just survive this massacre, but dominate. This trial by fire forged a new, incredibly fearless version of Gayle King. She had stared down the barrel of a network-ending scandal and hadn't blinked. This newfound power emboldened her to tackle heavier, far more dangerous journalistic territory. She was no longer just the friendly, relatable morning host. She was a heavyweight interrogator ready to ask the impossible questions. But stepping into the fire to save your network is one thing. What happens when your newfound fearlessness leads you to ask a question so controversial, so deeply polarizing, that the entire world suddenly turns its absolute, unbridled fury directly onto you. Gayle was about to find out that journalistic bravery comes with a terrifying, potentially deadly price. Following the Charlie Rose fallout, Gayle was no longer viewed as just a morning show host. She had morphed into the undisputed heavyweight champion of CBS News. She earned the right to hold the world's most controversial figures to the fire. When R. Kelly jumped out of his chair during their explosive interview, screaming and towering over her in a terrifying rage, Gayle didn't even flinch. She sat perfectly still, maintained eye contact, and calmly said, "Robert." In that single, breathtaking moment, she cemented her status as a broadcasting titan who possessed ice in her veins. She was fearless, unshakable, bulletproof, or so we thought. Because what happens when that exact same journalistic fearlessness collides with a grieving, fiercely protective public? In early 2020, the world was brought to a devastating standstill by the sudden, tragic death of basketball legend Kobe Bryant. The grief was global, visceral, and overwhelming. Amidst this emotionally charged atmosphere, Gayle sat down with WNBA star Lisa Leslie to discuss Kobe's massive legacy. Doing what any seasoned journalist is trained to do, Gayle asked a difficult question. She inquired whether Kobe's complicated past, specifically his 2003 sexual assault case, complicated his broader historical legacy in the eyes of his millions of devoted fans. It was a fair, albeit uncomfortable, journalistic question. But when the network blasted a tiny, contextless fraction of that interview across social media, they inadvertently lit a match in a room full of gasoline. The backlash wasn't just a wave. It was a devastating, suffocating tsunami of hatred. Overnight, the woman who had just carried her network through a crisis became the most hated person on the internet. Celebrities launched vicious, profanity-laced tirades against her to millions of followers. The internet mob mobilized with a terrifying, unified ferocity. They weren't just criticizing her interviewing style, they were actively trying to destroy her life. The public assumed a woman who survived decades in cutthroat television would simply brush off the digital noise. They thought she had the thick skin required to ignore the trolls. But the horrifying reality of what Gayle was enduring behind closed doors was kept entirely hidden from the viewers. This wasn't just mean tweets. These were highly specific, graphic, and credible death threats. The vitriol became so intensely dangerous that CBS was forced to dispatch around-the-clock armed security details to protect her. She couldn't walk down the street. She couldn't leave her apartment without looking over her shoulder. She was essentially a prisoner in her own life. The emotional toll was absolute devastation. Oprah eventually went on national television, openly weeping as she revealed that her best friend was not doing well, that Gayle was receiving death threats, and that the stress was physically destroying her. Imagine pouring 40 years of your life into building a sterling reputation of integrity and empathy, only to have the entire world turn on you in a matter of seconds over a 30-second out-of-context video clip. The psychological trauma of being branded a villain, of receiving messages from people telling you they wanted you dead, shattered the invincible armor Gayle had spent her entire career building. She was terrified, exhausted, and profoundly isolated. The vibrant, joyful anchor who loved nothing more than connecting with people was suddenly terrified of the public she had served for decades. While she eventually navigated her way through the scandal, and apologies were eventually issued by some of her most vocal attackers, the damage was already permanently woven into her psyche. The horrific ordeal drained her, aged her, and in the brutally unforgiving, hypervisual medium of television, showing signs of wear and tear is the absolute kiss of death. Because while Gayle was quietly trying to heal her fractured mental health, the corporate executives at the network were already looking at the calendar. In a deeply ageist industry that ruthlessly discards women the moment they show a single gray hair, a new, entirely different threat was actively plotting against her. Gayle was busy bracing herself for another boardroom brawl, completely unaware that an unexpected, devastating realization was about to hit her from the blind side. And it had absolutely nothing to do with her multi-million-dollar television contract or her daily ratings. A deeply personal clock had started ticking. Television is a uniquely cruel mistress, but broadcast news is an entirely different beast with its own set of unspoken, weaponized rules. In this multi-billion-dollar arena, male anchors are allowed to gracefully age into distinguished silver foxes, earning gravitas and authority with every new wrinkle. But for women, the rules are horrifyingly different. For female anchors, the moment you cross a certain age threshold, an invisible, terrifying countdown clock begins ticking above your head. In the ruthlessly ageist arena of network television, women over 60 aren't celebrated as veterans. They are often quietly, systematically pushed out the back door to make room for a younger, cheaper demographic. As Gayle King crossed into her 70s, she found herself standing directly in the crosshairs of this deeply entrenched corporate double standard. Despite possessing a superhuman work ethic, despite having literally saved the morning broadcast from total annihilation, and despite remaining the network's undeniable ratings draw, the executives were already whispering. Behind the heavy oak doors of the CBS boardrooms, the cold, calculating executives were quietly evaluating her expiration date. It didn't matter that she was landing the biggest exclusive interviews on the planet or that she had dedicated her entire life to the craft. To the corporate machine, she was becoming an expensive liability aging out of their prime target demographic, a harsh reality that has ended the careers of countless legendary women before her. For a woman who had spent 4 decades clawing her way out of Oprah's shadow to finally claim her own throne, the mere suggestion that she should gracefully step aside was an absolute insult. Gayle wasn't about to quietly surrender the desk she had bled for. She actively dug her heels in, responding to the subtle executive microaggressions the only way she knew how, by outworking absolutely everyone else in the building. She took on more assignments, jumped on more cross-country flights, and refused to say no, determined to prove she possessed the exact same relentless stamina she had in her 30s. She was gearing up for the most vicious, high-stakes boardroom brawl of her entire career. But this desperate, white-knuckled grip on her career was requiring an unsustainable amount of energy. Gayle was so hyper-focused on battling the ageist executives and proving her invincible worth to the network that she completely ignored the blaring warning signs flashing within her own life. She was preparing for a corporate war, entirely unaware that a completely different kind of reckoning was waiting in the wings. Because no matter how fierce your willpower is, you cannot out-negotiate Father Time, and you certainly cannot outrun the physical and psychological toll of chronic, unrelenting stress. The decades of brutal 3 a.m. wake-up calls, the paralyzing public scandals, the horrific death threats, and the sheer exhaustion of having to constantly prove her legitimacy were rapidly catching up to her. The warning signs didn't announce themselves with a dramatic medical collapse. They crept in slowly, silently eroding the unshakable foundation she had spent a lifetime building. It started with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of makeup or bright studio lighting could completely hide. The mental sharpness that defined her legendary career was being clouded by a terrifying burnout. She was secretly navigating an incredibly deeply personal diagnosis of her own mortality and changing physical limitations, a reality that she was terrified to admit, not just to the CBS executives, but to herself. Gayle thought she could simply muscle her way through this silent suffering, smiling through the immense pressure just as she always had. But the human body is not a machine, and eventually the bill always comes due. Just as the industry whispers reached a fever pitch, the perfectly poised facade finally began to crack in the most public way imaginable. The woman who never missed a beat was suddenly missing from the desk entirely, sparking a wave of frantic speculation. What exactly was happening to Gayle King when the cameras turned off? And what dark, hidden truth was buried deep within the leaked pages of her highly publicized contract negotiations? The truth was about to send shockwaves through the entire television industry. The first cracks in the armor didn't happen all at once. They were subtle, unsettling shifts that only the most fiercely observant viewers managed to catch. For years, Gayle King was the absolute definition of reliability. She was the anchor who never called out sick, who never complained about the brutal hours, and who always, without fail, delivered the news with a bright, unflappable energy. She was the steady heartbeat of CBS. But suddenly, that heartbeat began to skip. Rumors began swirling with a vicious intensity when Gayle started taking sudden, entirely unexplained absences from the morning news desk. She would vanish for days at a time, leaving her co-anchors to awkwardly scramble and cover for her without offering the audience any real explanation. For a woman whose entire identity was built on her unparalleled work ethic, these mysterious disappearances were massive, flashing red sirens. When she was on the air, something was undeniably different. The razor-sharp composure that defined her career was visibly fracturing in real time. There were uncharacteristic, tear-filled moments during broadcasts. Times when Gayle, usually the stoic rock holding the show together, would suddenly become overwhelmingly emotional, her voice cracking as she struggled to read through simple news segments. The bulletproof anchor was suddenly terrifyingly vulnerable. Panic immediately erupted among her fiercely loyal fan base. Social media lit up with frantic speculation. Was she secretly battling a terminal illness? Was the network quietly forcing her out? Had the trauma of the Kobe Bryant death threats finally caused a complete psychological collapse? The public desperately assumed that this was just the exhaustion of a demanding schedule finally catching up to a woman in her 70s. They thought she just needed a long vacation. But the truth, buried deep within the highly secretive, cutthroat world of her contract negotiations, told a significantly darker, far more complicated story. Behind the scenes, Gayle wasn't just battling exhaustion. She was fighting a deeply emotional war for her own worth. When her massive contract with CBS came up for renewal, the network executives didn't just hand over a blank check to the woman who had single-handedly saved their morning franchise. Instead, they played a brutal game of corporate hardball. Leaked reports suggested that the network was heavily dragging its feet, subtly signaling that they viewed her as a depreciating asset rather than their most valuable player. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated heartbreak of that realization. After giving 40 years of her life to the industry, after sacrificing her personal life, after enduring death threats, and after holding the network together through its darkest, most scandalous hours, they were still hesitating to pay her what she was worth. It was a devastating, deeply personal slap in the face. This corporate disrespect broke something fundamental inside of her. The tears on television weren't just from a lack of sleep. They were the physical manifestation of profound betrayal and total burnout. She realized that no matter how much of her soul she sacrificed to the network gods, to them, she would always just be a line item on a budget spreadsheet. Gayle was completely empty. The relentless pursuit of proving herself to an industry that would always eventually try to replace her had completely drained her life force. She had spent her entire existence running at top speed, terrified that if she ever slowed down, she would disappear back into Oprah's shadow. But as the network stalled on her contract and her physical exhaustion reached a terrifying peak, she was forced to finally stop running. For the first time in her life, Gayle had to look in the mirror and ask herself a terrifying question. If she wasn't the invincible television anchor, who was she? She was standing at the edge of a massive, terrifying precipice. The industry was bracing for a messy, highly publicized contract dispute, assuming Gayle would fight to the bitter end to keep her seat. But they grossly underestimated the profound emotional shift happening inside of her. Just as the media prepared to officially write her off as a tragic casualty of ageist television politics, Gayle made a quiet, unbelievably definitive move that completely blindsided the executives, leaving even her closest, most trusted confidants utterly speechless. At 71 years old, standing amidst the rubble of exhausting contract negotiations and physical burnout, Gayle King found herself stranded at a deeply emotional crossroad. For decades, her entire existence had been defined by the red light of a television camera. The adrenaline of breaking news, the thrill of the chase, the intoxicating power of holding the world's attention. That was her drug. It was her identity. But as the adrenaline finally wore off, leaving only a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake, the silence of her personal life became deafening. While Gayle was busy conquering the globe and fighting network executives, her family dynamics were quietly, inevitably shifting. The bittersweet reality of aging is that while you are busy building a legacy, life continues to move forward without you. Her children were grown, leading their own busy, fulfilling lives. The joyous arrival of her grandchildren was a profound blessing, but it also served as a painful, glaring reminder of everything she was missing while trapped inside a television studio at 4 o'clock in the morning. She realized, with a heavy, sinking heart, that her relentless career ambition might be costing her the most precious commodity she had left: time. The peaceful, quiet final chapters of her life, the moments meant for enjoying the fruits of her monumental labor, were being actively stolen by corporate boardrooms and teleprompters. The once clear, rigid lines she had drawn between her public persona as a fierce journalist and her private desires as a mother and grandmother were blurring entirely. She no longer wanted to fight. She just wanted to be present. The psychological toll of this realization was massive. She was being forced to reevaluate exactly who she was without the title of anchor attached to her name. It's a terrifying prospect for anyone, but for a woman who spent 40 years trying to prove her individual worth to the entire world, stepping away felt terrifyingly similar to surrendering. If she left the desk, would she simply fade back into being just Oprah's friend? Would the industry instantly forget the empire she had built with her own two hands? These were the agonizing questions keeping her awake at night, compounding the sheer exhaustion of her daily broadcasts. The CBS executives, fully aware of her emotional fatigue, foolishly believed they held all the cards. They assumed she would eventually cave during negotiations, desperate to cling to her television relevance at any cost. They thought they could push her into accepting a diminished role, a quieter exit strategy that served their corporate interests while systematically phasing her out. They were entirely wrong. Instead of fighting the ageist executives or desperately clinging to the anchor desk, Gayle did the absolute last thing anyone in the industry expected her to do. She stopped negotiating. She stopped trying to prove her worth to men in expensive suits who had already decided her expiration date. She looked at the empire she had built, looked at the toll it had taken on her soul, and made a deeply personal, remarkably quiet decision. She didn't issue a fiery press release. She didn't launch a massive public relations campaign to demand more money. She simply leaned into the silence. She began structuring a life that prioritized her own mental health and her family over the relentless demands of the network. It was a massive, unprecedented shift in power. By refusing to play the corporate game, she completely neutralized the executive's leverage. Even Oprah, the woman who knew Gayle better than anyone on earth, was reportedly stunned by this sudden, profound shift in her best friend's mindset. The fiercely ambitious journalist who once swore she would practically die at the anchor desk was suddenly talking about walking away from it all. But what was the final, devastating catalyst that pushed Gayle to this stunning realization? As the industry reeled from her quiet rebellion, the reality of Gayle's current status at CBS began to leak, revealing a heartbreaking farewell that no one was prepared for. The reality of Gayle King's current status within the hallowed halls of CBS News goes far beyond what any gossip tabloid or industry trade paper has managed to uncover. The whispers of her impending exit are no longer just corporate rumors. They are the quiet, undeniable mechanics of a legendary career slowly coming to an end. What we are witnessing is not a tragic defeat at the hands of an ageist industry, but rather a profound, deeply emotional surrender. At 71, Gayle is finally, unapologetically ready to take off the heavy armor she's been forced to wear for the last 40 years. Through recent, deeply vulnerable reflections, she has begun redefining what it actually means to age gracefully in a medium that demands perpetual youth. In rare moments of unguarded honesty, Gayle has confessed to the immense, crushing weight of her own legacy. She has spoken about the sheer terror of slowing down, the fear of losing her voice, and the heartbreaking realization that she cannot physically maintain the superhuman pace that defined her rise to the top. These aren't the words of a woman fighting to stay relevant. They are the confessions of a titan preparing to say goodbye on her own terms. She is meticulously crafting an exit strategy that protects her peace while still commanding the absolute, undeniable respect of her peers. She secured a contract that allows her to significantly pull back, stepping away from the daily, soul-crushing grind of the morning news cycle to focus only on the massive, culture-shifting interviews that truly matter to her. She is reclaiming her time, prioritizing her grandchildren, and choosing to walk away before the industry forces her out the back door. But this transition is far from easy, and it is undeniably tinged with a deep, lingering sadness. Every broadcast feels a little heavier, a little more poignant, as viewers slowly realize they are watching the final act of a broadcasting icon. The tears she has shed on air are no longer just from exhaustion. They are the physical manifestation of a woman mourning the impending end of a career she fought so desperately to build. She is saying goodbye to the very thing that saved her from the shadows, the very thing that proved to the world exactly who she was. As she contemplates walking away from that iconic glass desk forever, one lingering, deeply complex question remains. What was the true, ultimate cost of her legendary career? She achieved the fame, she secured the legacy, and she shattered the glass ceilings, but she sacrificed her anonymity, her peace of mind, and at times her own physical safety to do it. Was the view from the top of the mountain worth the sheer agony of the climb? The public may never fully understand the immense sacrifices Gayle King made to wake up America with a smile every single morning. We may never fully grasp the silent battles she fought behind the scenes to legitimize her own name. But as the lights slowly begin to dim on her historic tenure at CBS, it is undeniably clear that the landscape of morning television will never, ever be the same without her. She leaves behind a massive, complicated legacy, one of fierce loyalty, unparalleled resilience, and the heartbreaking reality of what it truly takes for a woman to survive at the very top. What was the ultimate ultimatum CBS handed Gayle King on her 71st birthday? And what is the heart-wrenching secret she whispered to Oprah that completely altered her retirement plans? The final missing piece of Gayle's story is about to be exposed, and it changes absolutely everything.